Since it has just been announced that Christopher Nolan's next film will be his adaptation of The Odyssey, I thought let's go through Christopher Nolan's filmography today, all 12 of his feature-length films, and rank them into the tiers that I've selected here. So we have amazing, great, good, okay, and meh. Meh just meaning not bad necessarily. Spoiler warning, I actually don't think Nolan has made any bad films during his career of his 12 films, which is a massive achievement in itself. I did actually do this on the channel a long time ago, pre-Oppenheimer, but having watched Oppenheimer and every single one of his films since then, as you can probably imagine, a lot of my opinions have changed. Without further ado, let's rank Christopher Nolan's filmography. Alright, so the first film we've got on the list is Batman Begins. I think a fitting start and setup to Nolan's Batman or the Dark Knight trilogy when you've got this picturesquely disgusting Gotham in need of support, in need of help. And this really kind of almost revitalized Batman, you know, in a period where since the 90s there were Batman, Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin, and Batman Forever, by the way, being really good, but in the grand public's eyes, this revitalized it. And do I think that as a common theme throughout the trilogy itself, do I think that it does struggle with its hand-to-hand combat? Sure, but I also think it has a lot going for it, and as a story of origin, so to speak, within Batman, I think it really works well. I think that it also, even though maybe it doesn't utilize the villains that we have in place, it has this dark, decrepit atmosphere, and each cast member really makes the most out of their selected role. So Batman Begins is an interesting one. I actually think this is going to go in the good category. Now, maybe good should be renamed very good, because I think it kind of falls within that. It's better than okay. It's not quite up to those top two tiers in terms of a Nolan release, but I think it's very good. I think Batman Begins is a fitting first pick, straight down the middle in the good category, or very good, so to speak. Then we have Dunkirk, and Dunkirk is a really interesting one. Since its release, it's kind of remained quite a divisive Nolan film, in that I think the issue with Dunkirk is it's a film that I don't think a lot of people thought they were going to receive. They thought they might receive something different within its context, and it ended up being slightly different. You know, you have this kind of pinpoint, choppy, focused, different perspectives focused war film, where it's not all action and the foreplay leading to that, but it's kind of showing you the experience of people on the beaches, on the seafront, and the different points of view, where you've got the normal families, and you've got the pilots, and you've got the people who are on, the trenches, so to speak, itself. And I think this showcases a common theme again, which I'll go through as we speak about his career. His maturity, Nolan's maturity in his late stage work within his writing. The bag that Christopher Nolan's always had is in the visual aspects. His ability to produce a palpitate, a blockbuster, and something that really grabs you by the reins and draws you in its big moments. Nolan has now mastered those little ones as well, which I think is even more impressive overall. Not to mention, I think, even with Dunkirk's emotional potency and big moments, it also has this blistering score, and it could be one of Nolan's best visual efforts to date as well. I actually think Dunkirk, for me, is going to go in the great category. I think it's that kind of upper echelon of Nolan. I think now we are actually within the best stage of his career, because he has managed to balance the maturity with his writing and these huge visual blockbusters which we all know and love. So Dunkirk may be a hot take, but for me it's actually going to be right up there in the great category. Then we have Interstellar, a film that actually recently got a re-release probably everywhere except the UK, because that's how it is. Interstellar, again, for me, starts the sort of late stage Nolan career, or not late stage, so to speak, because he's only about 50 now, but the point in which I think it got better. I think Nolan developed as a writer. Interstellar has these huge bursting sequences that are so riveting when you've got these space travel moments, and Matthew McConaughey just delivering this really emotionally nuanced performance, and probably the best of his career, along the likes of Dallas Buyers Club or True Detective Season 1. it really delivers on an emotional response. But I think whereas I used to have issues with Interstellar in the way that it tied things together, in the way it ended, in the way that the sentimentality kind of took over, now I see that as a positive. Because what Nolan managed to create with Interstellar is this wonderfully balanced and woven in subtext of time and relationships and family in a way that is really nuanced and beautifully set, mixed together with this huge blockbuster with this devastating score and great visual moments, and also a cast that is they all pull their punches, so to speak. And I think that for me now, I realise kind of the more I watch Interstellar, it is probably one of Nolan's best ever works, and it's set off in what I think is the best stage of his career as well. So Interstellar, I'm actually going great. For me, just behind Dunkirk, which again is probably a hot take for a lot of you, I imagine. Let me know in the comments if it is. But yeah, I think Interstellar is great. I think it's kind of within that kind of range as well, in the great category. Next we have Inception. Inception is another one where I think a lot of people find it to be the amount of exposition, quite a negative, and the amount it takes to get to its final act, which, by the way, I think ties the film together wonderfully. And when you've got a guy like Leo delivering what I believe to be one of his better performances, and that's saying a lot because I think he's had a lot of wonderful performances, when you've got these huge visual moments, and again, the use of time, which is a constant theme throughout Nolan's career, as we'll get onto in a second with another film, it's a really, really well-made blockbuster. Does it have its moments where I think the characterization isn't done as well as Dunkirk or Interstellar, so to speak? No, but I also think it works in a focus of this is what Nolan's good at, and this is his jam. And I think the ending for me is by far the most powerful sort of cathartic release of the film as well, and really gives you that. Inception, I think, is very, very good. It would probably be higher than Batman Begins, so I'm going to put it in the highest tier of very good, just above Batman Begins. But I don't think it quite reaches the likes of Interstellar or Dunkirk for me. Next we have Dark Knight Rises. Now, Dark Knight Rises is a heavily discourse. It's been in a lot of discourse over the years, and I think, me included, when I first watched it, I loved it. I mean, granted, I was the age of sort of 13 in 2012 when it first came out. I still remember going to see this in the cinemas. I think Dark Knight Rises does a pretty bad job of concluding the bombastic trilogy that is the Dark Knight trilogy. I think it's nonsensical in a nature that is to its detriment, unlike the film that we're going to speak about next, which I think is to the benefit of the film. There are, the moments that in Dark Knight Rises that work are these big bombastic moments. So you've got kind of the opening sequence. You've got a lot of the Bane moments where Tom Hardy's kind of putting on this brutish act that I think was the perfect, casting choice for Bane. But you've also got moments that where they lack in logic. For me, that's never really been an issue, because I think the whole idea of plot holes is not one that I tend to bother myself in having conversations over, unless it's really to a detriment, which is very, very rare. The Dark Knight Rises is a very heavy-handed thematic film in its use of the policing moments, and I think that while it has these very fun moments, it's also too much of a mess for its own good. Dark Knight Rises for me is certainly not a bad film. I probably enjoy more of it than I don't, but I think I'm just putting it in okay. I don't think it's bad for any means, but I think it's a big step below the other two in the trilogy. Then we have Tenet. Now, if you were to ask me about Tenet 2 years ago, before I rewatched it, which was yesterday, by the way, my first watch since 2020, since COVID, Tenet was a film that was never going to garner this crazy release due to the time of release, and also it works in a way that I think Tenet is so silly and nonsensical, similar to The Dark Knight Rises, but with it in its absolute benefit, with a cast that is so wonderfully put together. It's almost, it is an experimental avant-garde blockbuster, which in the modern day we don't usually see. And it's almost like Nolan set out to make an artistic point, if anything, to show that he could really, everything that you criticized him for, here's that and more when it comes to exposition, when it comes to using time and complex moments and heavy-handed dialogue. But it works so much in its benefit with this, in that it is kind of this sounds silly, but avant-garde blockbuster in the modern age. When you've got Robert Pattinson, you've got David Washington, these really silly moments and huge visual sequences that are just amazingly set up. And I was in that camp when it first came out. You know, it's nonsensical, it's convoluted, it's yada yada yada. You know, all these common critiques and things we hear about Nolan over and over again. But now I think it's kind of wonderful and brilliant. And it is actually going to get into my great category, to be honest. It's going to be a step below the likes of Interstellar and Dunkirk, but it's there. I think I'm on the boat right now that does think Tenet is really good. I actually imagine and think it will go even higher the more I watch it over time as well. Next we have Following. Now Following is an interesting one, and one that I'm not going to cover too much because I don't think it needs to be covered too much. Following is an interesting film that, for lack of a better term, is kind of boring. In a way that I think most modern day and even traditional filmmakers and classic filmmakers, their debuts really are. There's a lot of promise, they're quite low budget, there's some, you know, visual motifs that are really cool, but at the same time, kind of uninteresting. It's very similar, if I was to give a direct example, to another great modern director's debut. I'd look at like Martin Scorsese with his debut with Harvey Keitel in, I think it was 1967. Who's That Knocking on My Door, so should I say, where you have these moments where you're like, okay, there is clear promise that was shown, and you can understand why, in Nolan's case, he would be a hired hand for a film that would follow, which we'll speak about in a second. But he's also kind of dull, which is the main concern. Now, I think Following, and as I said earlier, I don't think he's made any bad films, but for me, I think Following is definitely a step down from everything else. It's in that meh category. I like it just as much as I don't like it. It's just kind of there. But again, not bad. It's just kind of there. Next we have Insomnia, which I believe was a remake. Of a Norwegian thriller from the 90s. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But when you've got a cast of the likes of, you know, it's a younger period of Nolan. I think it was in like 2002. A cast of like Al Pacino, Robin Williams. This is a common theme. I think Nolan actually manages to get the best out of him, especially Robin Williams, who was tremendous in this, by the way. And you've got this exploration of a psyche of police and of a policeman, and it's interesting in points and works on a base level of being a dramatic thriller and mystery, but it also shows a level of Nolan didn't really, you know, he's a hired hand for this film. And it didn't really show much of what he could do, in my opinion. It was more just a remake to be a remake and a remake to be there. With a cast of Al Pacino and Ron Williams where it's serviceable, it's fun even at points. I really like the ending as well. But I don't think it's as interesting as conceptually as anything else Nolan's ever made, including probably Following, actually. Or maybe not including Following, but everything else. In that he was technically a hired hand. Insomnia, for me, I still think I like it more than I don't. It's still a serviceable watch. It's going to go in the okays category. Below The Dark Knight Rises, just ahead of Following. We then have Memento. Memento is a film I've been kind of up and down on over the years. You know, non-linear in 2000 when it came out was already a thing, of course. You know, storytelling like this was already told. But I do think this kind of revolutionized the modern day non-linear approach, and also it was like a modern day noir, so to speak. It was really dark, gritty. I think Guy Pearce, every time I watch this, I'm constantly left baffled as to why we don't see him more. Or I know why, but I wish we'd see him more in more projects, because he is wonderful. And I think it ties itself together really, really well in that it has this dirty, gritty aesthetic, and it's really kind of not highbrow, so to speak, but high concept. And again, it's an early period that Nolan, considering this was, I believe, his second film, it's a really massive feat to take on, and a complicated one that I think we've seen people try to replicate, you know, over the years a number of times, but not quite to the same level of skill and quality, and not with quite the same lead performance as well, or quality of lead performance. So I think this is going to go in the very good category, along with Batman Begins and Inception. It's probably going to be higher than Batman Begins, and then just lower than Inception. But I think Memento is very, very good, and it's one of those where I completely understand why people would have it at the bottom and at the top. But for me, it's kind of down the middle range, or probably exactly that middle range. Alright, now we have Oppenheimer. Now, if you followed me for a while, or watch any of my content, or have seen, you know, my Letterboxd, if you haven't followed me on Letterboxd, Seth's reviews in the link below. I think Oppenheimer is by far, I'm going to say this already, by far Christopher Nolan's best achievement to date. I think it's his magnum opus, so to speak. It's great artistic work. It's a series of whirling horror-esque imagery to really put you in the position of the moments leading up to one of the greatest disasters and greatest decisions, horrific decisions in human history. And I almost think, just to get this out of the way as well, and a lot of the response following this film, not a lot of it because it is greatly loved and was greatly loved, but was a critique of it saying that they should have showcased the effects in Nagasaki and Hiroshima of the bombings. But I don't think that's Nolan's place to do. And this film it reflects on those events in the most horrific and it showcases in the most horrific and unjust way, without blatantly showing it, which again I don't think is Nolan's place. Without this political slant, which is a rarity in Western works and Western media. And it meshes sequences together of this wondrous dialogue and this beautiful cast, and the score from Ludwig Göransson, which is, I don't listen to scores a lot, but this one I've listened to over and over again. It's palpitating, it's beautiful, it's sad, it's demoralizing, and I think it's a really wonderful study of character. The way it makes not only its excellent use of runtime, but it's also such a mature film. And just to go back to what I said a minute ago about the cast, you've got people like Rami Malek and Casey Affleck and Gary Oldman, who literally have these single scene sequences, or maybe two for a couple of them, but blow those scenes out the water, and then you've got Robert Downey Jr., Florence Pugh, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon on the side of a Cillian Murphy performance, which I think is a generational performance as well. You probably tell by my passion in my voice. I think it's a tremendous film that is so mature, makes the use of every single moment, plays itself in a really clever way, of a brilliant use of flashbacks and an intricate way of showcasing not necessarily a twist, but a turn of events in the latter half of the film. The courtroom scenes are wonderful as well. This is by far, in my opinion, as I said earlier, Nolan's greatest achievement today. So Oppenheimer is a masterpiece for me. 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5, whatever you want to say. This is Nolan's best work. Then we have The Prestige. The Prestige is an interesting one. It's similar to another film I'm going to speak about in a second, where when I first watched The Prestige, I thought it was amazing. And I still think it's good, but not quite to that same level. The atmosphere's there. You've got this brilliant dynamic of Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale going back and forth and showcasing these visual trickery that I think Nolan really excels in. But I think where Prestige is the negatives of Prestige come from its inability to showcase its characters in greater effects. When you've got the likes of Scarlett Johansson and Rebecca Ferguson, I don't think used that well in terms of showcasing, the relationships of the other people in the film. The ending is really great. I really like the ending of The Prestige a lot. And, like it or not, even though now it's become synonymous with, especially the start of TikTok in the film period, of, 10 out of 10 plot twist, it was a plot twist that shocked me. Prestige definitely shocked me on first watch, and it's granted that it's the ending is great. Like, it is a release you need, and it's one of those kind of jaw-dropping moments. But I think the rest of the film is just good. It's a good film. It's a solid film. Characterization, not great a lot of the time, outside of the main two roles, and I think a lot of it's kind of shoved in there in terms of twists and classic Nolan errors of that period in time, which I think he's grown out of in his later years, in my opinion. But it's a good film. I think, whereas I would have it 5 years ago in the great category, now I'm going to have it in good, and it would be the lowest end of good. It's definitely a good step up from the likes of Insomnia and The Dark Knight Rises, and following, of course, a massive step up. It's a big jump. But I don't see as much of it now. I don't see the quality in it now that I used to. Still a good film, just not quite the higher tier of Nolan's filmography, in my opinion. And finally, we have The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight, everyone, is going to want to hear about this, because without exaggeration, Dark Knight is not only Nolan's most popular, but one of the most popular films of the 21st century, in a way that it kind of transcended superhero work. And kind of brought it into the dark crime genre, and really did change it for the better, and, well, better or worse, depends how you see it. And it has this kind of maniacal mix of nonsensically brilliant action sequences, these huge moments, and also, you know, close, intimate moments with Bruce Wayne, and, you know, and a furthering of Bruce Wayne that we had from Batman Begins. And also you have the brilliant, wicked dynamic of Christian Bale's Batman and Heath Ledger's Joker. Heath Ledger's Joker, I think, is brilliant. And you maybe can maybe bring up points and negatives about, for example, the lack of quality within the hand-to-hand combat scenes, which have been said many, many times, including by myself, and I do think that is a detriment to it. And I also think, again, there's a lot of issues with this, but there's also so much fun to be had in the opening sequences, and I think it's inevitably a film where there is lows. I think there are lows in The Dark Knight, but the highs are so high it drags them up from these films. You know, I do still think it's maybe not as much discrepancy, but I do think it's still the height of the trilogy, and it does get into my great category, probably above Tenet. But again, as I said, I imagine the more I watch Tenet now, it might go over. But I think Dark Knight is going to slide into great. It's still a great film, change the superhero genre, and it's a great reflection on the genre in general. I think it's a lot of fun to be had, especially within the dynamic of characters, and also the introduction of Aaron Eckhart's character as well, who I thought was brilliant. But this is kind of my Nolan setup as of right now. So we have following in Meh, then followed by Insomnia, and The Dark Knight Rises in okay, in good/very good, because I think all these films are very good, maybe bar Prestige, Batman Begins, Memento, and Inception. In great, Tenet, The Dark Knight, Interstellar, and Dunkirk, which again might be controversial. And in amazing, by far and away, maybe not far and away, because I do love a lot of his work, but I think that's Oppenheimer is by far, and that is Oppenheimer, his most recent. I'm really, really excited for The Odyssey. It's going to be really interesting to see how he pulls out the fantasy elements of it, which is something I'm very excited for. Hopefully he gets Ludwig Göransson back. But this is kind of my tier list of Christopher Nolan's filmography. Let me know in the comments below what you would change, what I am wrong about, as I'm sure you will anyway. And with that, I will see you next time with my next tier list.